My Lords, first oral question, Lord Teverson.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the Government is committed to decarbonising transport in support of our national missions to kick-start economic growth and make Britain a clean energy superpower, and public transport must, of course, play its part. The Department for Transport is overhauling public transport services and supporting active travel so that lower carbon options are attractive choices. Through the electrification of public transport, we will reduce carbon emissions from the fleet, improving passenger services and creating more sustainable journeys.
As the Minister will know, surface transport emissions are our largest proportion of emissions in the UK at the moment, at about a quarter. And it's done a fair bit on the buses side, which I welcome from the Government. But will it commit to 2030 being the first year when we ban new diesel buses entering our roads? And will it continue the current level of funding on the zero-emission bus grant after the present funding runs out, I think, later this year?
I thank the Noble Lord for the question. I still be aware the previous Government consulted on an end date for the sale of diesel buses back in spring 22. We are currently, as he referred to, legislating in the Bus Services Bill to accelerate bus decarbonisation, and we will be placing a requirement on operators not to use new non-zero emission buses from a date in the future that's not earlier than 2030. And this does allow the sector to plan for a smooth transition to a zero emission future.
My noble friend will recall that in spite of their policies.
So made any assessment at all of the effectiveness of the Coventry very light rail system? As its name implies, it's easier and cheaper to construct than conventional urban tramways. And in particular, has any assessment been made as to the relevance of that system to possible development in other major cities in Britain?
I thank my noble friend for that question, and he's absolutely right. In the right setting, light rail systems can be a very viable and attractive alternative to heavy rail or indeed more bus systems. What I can tell him is that several regions with existing or planned mass transit systems outside London are receiving investment through the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlements programme. And this funding is providing 5-year local transport capital settlements over 2022 to 23 to 2026 to 27. This is to eligible mayoral combined authorities, which will include Coventry, for investment in public and sustainable transport infrastructure, including light rail.
My Lords, is it mathematically and physically possible to strengthen the UK's electricity supply system in time to meet the UK net zero target?
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for the question, and of course it's something that we are aware that it's important to develop greater electricity supply and infrastructure. We are confident that we can work with partners, both in terms of the transport and network rail and wider the national grid, to develop the sort of capacity of which he speaks, to develop the diesel-free, the carbon-free future we're talking about.
I know all that in spite of clear undertakings, the last Conservative government axed the proposed electrification of the Cardiff to Swansea line. Is there any prospect of that now being reconsidered?
Well, I'm pleased to say that rail is already the greenest form of transport, but more is indeed needed to meet its contribution to achieving net zero by 2050. I mean, for instance, 9% of all passenger miles are covered by electric vehicles, but so it accounts for only 1% of transport emissions across the sector. We are investing in electrification, particularly on the Transpennine route upgrade. We'll electrify upgrade the main arterial route between Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. I can't give my honourable friend any commitments today, obviously, on extending the Great Western Main Line electrification, but we are working to identify other opportunities for further electrification in light of the spending review.
What is the business case for electrification of public transport when government policy means that we have the highest electricity prices in the developed world, a position that will only get worse if we join the EU emissions trading scheme as mooted in this morning's deal.
Well, I admire the noble Lord's perspicacity in following this line of argument, but it is, of course, our reliance on gas from overseas that causes such fragility and variability in the cost of energy in this country. My Lords, I have to say, I believe that the struggle for decarbonised transport, clean development and indeed clean air is as important as the struggle for clean water was in the 19th century. Wise words, my Lord, and my Lords, and I can say not my own, those are the words of Grant Shapps, the former Conservative Transport Secretary.
My Lords, what role does the government see for using hydrogen to fully decarbonise the rail network? And could alternative zero-emission options such as hydrogen trains be the solution where electrification is not economically or geographically viable?
Well, my Lords, we are looking for opportunities to provide diesel-free solutions to rail travel, and that includes not only electrifying more of the network, but looking for infills such as bimodes or indeed some of the battery trials we've seen in places like Greenford and indeed on Merseyrail to supplement non-electrified routes that can be done in a carbon-free way. What I would say is that hydrogen has, of course, its place in the mix, but it seems to be that the sector is taking a mostly electric route these days.
My Lords, it's absolutely right that we try to move forward to decarbonise our public transport system. But of course, many of our rural areas have quite inadequate public transport already before we're starting to add that as an extra burden. Could the Noble Lord the Minister tell us what rural proofing is being done on this policy so that we can make sure that we're getting levelling up amongst rural areas?
Well, I mean, I would start by pointing the Right Reverend Prelate to the work that we've just been discussing ourselves in the House in recent weeks in terms of the bus services bill. That is a huge committed to supporting the decarbonisation of the bus fleet, and that bill took steps to accelerate the decarbonisation of the bus fleet and invest more than £37.5 million in the rollout of more zero-emission buses. There are indeed, we've confirmed over £1 billion of investment in buses at the budget, supporting improved services across the country, including in rural areas, and as well as keeping fares affordable.
Is my noble friend aware that it is more than 40 years since Sir Peter Parker, the then chairman of British Rail, recommended a rolling programme of railway electrification in this country, which would have had, as he said at the time, the twin merits of keeping together the expertise of those carrying out the electrification, as well as reducing long-term costs. Does he agree with me that Sir Peter Parker was right then, and he'd be right now?
Well, I mean, I would absolutely agree with my noble friend that electrification is an important part of the mix in decarbonising our transport network and indeed achieving our net zero goals. Electrification is indeed the most widespread method of decarbonising the railway. As I said, 39% of the rail network is electrified, but 74% of passenger vehicle kilometres travelled are electric. So we are making progress. I can't give my noble friend any further commitments, but we are looking beyond the Transpennine route upgrade to identify further opportunities for electrification across the network as part of the spending review.
My Lords, the noble Lord Hendy, very kindly joined me in congratulating the Harrogate Bus Company on its full electrification programme. But can I ask the Minister what more can be done to actually encourage bus companies round the country, particularly in rural areas, to join and produce electric buses for those that use them?
Well, I'd like to, if it isn't jumping on the bus bandwagon, to join in both his and my noble friend Lord Hendy's congratulations in Harrogate's achievement. We have made some amazing progress when it comes to zero-emission buses. More than 50% of new buses registered last year were zero-emission. That's a record 1,600. I'm very pleased to tell the House as well that more than 60% of buses procured via the ZEBRA process were procured and made by UK-based manufacturers. It is very much the case that zero-emission buses aren't just good for decarbonising transport, aren't just good for providing better, more reliable bus services, but it's good for growth in the growth in this country, which we need to see.
My Lords, the Minister made some excellent points earlier in response to the opposition's query about the price of electricity. And it is linked to gas prices. So does the Noble Lord the Minister know if the government has any plans to de-link it so that we get the true price of renewable energy?
Hear, hear.
Well, I'm afraid that I'm not aware of any particular plans. This strays a little outside my brief and indeed my briefing. But what I would say that it's really important that we enable more growth in transport and more green growth in transport to ensure that people have access to the sort of transport levels that we enjoy. Those of us who live in the capital enjoy. What we require, to paraphrase my friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, is that we want brilliantly boring public transport, so that it's the case that where you live doesn't determine what you can achieve in life.